So my name's Craig Levin. I'm currently at Stanford University. My trajectory was as follows. So I was elementary school, high school in Los Angeles, went to UCLA for college, started off as an English major and then later changed to physics and then added mathematics. So I ended up double majoring in physics and mathematics and then minoring in English because I had taken so many courses by the time I had switched. So very familiar with changes that can occur academically as an undergraduate in terms of what you want to do. Then when I was graduating from UCLA, I applied for industry positions, and I also applied to graduate school positions and in physics. And so and then I ended up going to graduate school in physics at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. And then, so I went to graduate school to get a PhD in physics. And then when you go to graduate school in physics at Yale, you get also the first year and a half, you take courses, you get a MS, a Master's of Science degree. And when you pass the qualifying examination, you get what's called an MPhil, Master's in Philosophy. And then after you do the research and defend your dissertation, you get a PhD. So I got a
Oh,
PhD in
wow.
physics. Yep. And then when I was graduating, I again looked at industry positions and I looked at academic positions. I looked at positions in physics, and then I looked at positions in application of physics. And one of them was in medicine. And so I ended up taking a job, and I can certainly talk about the decision process, but in the applications of physics in medicine, which they call biomedical physics. And that's where I did my postdoctoral studies. So after your PhD, you want to do some advanced training in a new field that is interesting to you from the research point of view. So I went into biomedical physics, focusing on what we call biomedical imaging. So, looking inside of you for disease without cutting you open. And then when I again finished my postdoctoral fellowship, that was at UCLA. I went back to UCLA just coincidentally because I had one of the best programs for what I wanted to do in biomedical physics. And then I looked at, again, jobs in industry. I also looked at jobs in academia, and I chose academia. I got a assistant professor position at UC San Diego, so not too far from San Marcos. So UC San Diego is a wonderful place. I did my assistant professorship there. Then I got an opportunity to move to Stanford, which I took, and been here since 2004.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. So could you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about what you do now at Stanford?
Yeah, so what I do right now is my job has, let's see, well, there's several roles. Okay, so first of all, if you become faculty at Stanford, you do research. You do a lot of research. So I want to say in terms of my overall time I spend is probably 70% on research, 20% on teaching. And teaching is a mixture of teaching actual courses and classes, as well as mentoring and advising PhD students, undergraduates, even sometimes high school students, postdoctoral fellows that are working with me on projects, and advising them, and mentoring them, and at times trying to keep up with everything they're doing too. So they're teaching me at the same time. And so that's kind of like so teaching. And then I have a lot of also administrative duties as well, recruiting new faculty, helping various services at university, things, improving things. So I have also I like to say, 5 to 10% is what I would say service roles. I also have a lot of administrative roles related to grants. Of course, you have grants and that funds your research. That's how you're able to support your research. And so, but there's a lot of overhead in terms of time and what you do with the grants and financial stuff and things like that. So I don't know, so kind of give you a reasonably clear picture of what I do.
I know that physics is like a hard field, and a lot of people are intimidated by it because of how much math and like how abstract the concept is in like more basic terms. Because you break down your research so that like a high schooler could try to
Yeah. I mean,
understand it?
first of all, physics is hard for people because part of it is a little bit the way we teach in school, maybe even down to high school level, on focusing on memorizing things, and physics is not really good for memory. You kind of have to understand the concepts. So if your teacher, which I happen to have a good teacher in high school in physics, I think that's why I stayed in it. They teach you to try to understand the concepts rather than memorizing concepts, understanding them, and then trying to understand subsequent consequences of those concepts based on your understanding of the concepts rather than memorizing what happens. And it's hard to do, but it comes natural to some people. But I think everybody could do well in physics if it was taught differently. So let's just put that aside. So in terms of what I do, I work on biomedical imaging, and I mentioned to you very simply that it's looking inside of somebody without cutting you open. And in order to do that, you have to try to understand, you have to back up a little, understand the types of signatures of disease, what is, specific disease that you're looking at. So there's different types of imaging modalities, such as magnetic resonance imaging or MRI. I'm not sure if you ever heard of that. X-ray CT imaging or the CAT scan. It's another type of thing. There's ultrasound. There's different types of imaging modalities, all based on physics. And the ones I just mentioned are more anatomical in a sense that you can only see the anatomy. So you're looking at sort of differences in which the ways those the energies that are used in those different imaging modalities interact with tissue, and that allows you to highlight or visualize the anatomy. And so those are anatomical imaging modalities. There's other more functional imaging modalities that are actually able to image the biology. And that's kind of more what I work on is trying to image the biology. So I do have to understand a bit about biology and chemistry. But so imagine if you're trying to interrogate some disease cell, let's say cancer, heart disease, neurological disorder, Alzheimer's disease. You're trying to interrogate them from outside the body. How do you do that? So, in the old days, you couldn't do that. You would have to cut out a piece of tissue, study it under a microscope to see the differences between the diseased tissue and the normal tissue. What they do in a biologist lab or a pathologist lab, someone who studies the disease in the cells under a microscope, is they often will look at the cells, but then they will stain the cells to looking for certain, what they call biomarkers, certain signatures of disease that are biological features. If you look at disease cells are, I think you learn in biology, these cells have things going on the surface of the cells and things going on inside the cells. And they found with many diseases, the disease cells act differently than normal cells in some way. There's some sort of measure of that, and you want to interrogate those features that are different with disease cells. So we do that with what's called contrast agents, which are basically stains. So they're chemicals that are injected into the body, because we want to do this non-invasively, that will circulate in the body and then accumulate in those cells that are expressing those disease features. So for example, cells have what's known as receptors, things that they grab molecules and bring them into the cells, or just the molecules stay on the surface of the cells. So some diseases, let's say, for example, breast cancer, there's an overexpression of these receptors. That means that the genes of the cell have been modified such that there's more types of receptors of this type than an ordinary cell would have. And so if you're able to have a molecule that will attach to those receptors, and therefore, if it's a disease cell, more receptors, you'll see a bigger signal in those cells and less of a signal in ordinary cells who might have the receptors but not as much. And then, of course, there's analogous things that go on inside the cell too. Same thing. There's got to be something different about the disease cell compared with the normal cell, and then we can interrogate that, just like a pathologist looking at a microscope might interrogate with that stain. And when I say stain, it's literally a different color to identify the different markers, the different targets that you're going after that are different with disease cells. Same thing with in vivo imaging. You inject a contrast agent, which is essentially a dye. It circulates in the body, accumulates in those cells of interest, and doesn't accumulate so much in the disease cells. But then that dye has to give off some sort of energy so that we can track it from outside the body. And that's where the physics comes in. So for example, one method is to label the dye with radioactivity. So wherever the dye goes, there's radioactivity, and then the radioactivity emits particles that come out of the body that you can track and make an image of. That's the basic idea. I talked to in adequately non-physics terms to understand what that is. Yeah. You collect all these signals from all the particles around the body, and you can make a tomographic image that is a three-dimensional image where you can look at different orientations of the way those particles are emitted from the body, and therefore the biodistribution of that stain that we put inside the body to be able to identify disease.
So we wanted to know like kind of like how you started to get into like the more research aspect. And then so like where did you start with research? Like did you like labs, internships and stuff like that?
Yeah, so great question. So when again, it's just your school kind of schooling where, so when I was finishing my PhD, I wanted to use, I really was into physics. I wanted to do physics research. So then you do a postdoctoral fellowship. And then I looked at physics PhDs, physics postdoctoral fellowships. So after your PhD, postdoctoral fellowship. And they were very interesting. So one of them was in atomic physics. One of them was in particle physics. But then I had this feeling I wanted to like impact people more. I mean, I think it's really important. Physics is really important to understand the universe and understand what's going inside of the nucleus of an atom and what's inside of the particles inside the nucleus, inside the atom, the protons and the neutrons, all that. And that was all very cool. And then understanding the atoms itself in atomic physics, and it's there's a lot of research going on. But I thought it would be more satisfying if I did something where I used physics and helped people. So of course, then you look at medicine, biology, trying to understand problems, address problems with physics approaches, developing new tools. And so that's kind of the way I landed, kind of what I'm doing more, where if I succeed in some of our projects, which are often funded by National Institute of Health, NIH, then it could help to diagnose and treat and manage patients that have diseases such as cancer or Alzheimer's disease and heart disease and things like that. So it was a more personal choice, working on something that's really more pursuing knowledge in a certain field versus actually applications of that knowledge to help people. So that's kind of why I chose that.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you. She wanted to talk about how you start like the big switch from English major to physics and kind of like why you decided that.
Okay, so I was at UCLA as a college student, and I was an English major, and I was having a lot of fun. I was taking books and going down to the beach and reading, and you had to write papers and all that. But it was just, and I was working on, and I just remember I remember talking to somebody at the beach while I was reading a book for a class. It was like an American literature class, and they asked me, what are you gonna do when you graduate? It's like, I didn't think about that. I mean, I think it's great to be educated. I think we're really, really lucky. You guys probably go to college, and we're very fortunate compared to most people in the world to get an education. I think so. It's just great to get and to be a college graduate. So I knew I wanted to do that, but then I was thinking, what can I do? And I knew in high school I really liked physics, so I said, okay, well maybe I'll change physics major. I looked at a little bit. I read, we didn't have the internet back then. It's hard to believe, but I just read a little about what physics people do, and they're doing all kinds of things. Some of them go into defense. I didn't want to do that. Some of them go into pure research. Some of them solve problems in medicine, biology. I wasn't necessarily into that at the time, and but I thought that physics was really interesting. It involved math. I loved math at that time too, as well. So I said, well, let's go. I'll change the physics, but then keep taking English courses because you need to have general education requirements in college, and also I liked reading and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I switched to a minor in English and then a major in physics, and then about a year later, I realized I was doing so much math, and I really liked physics, and that I liked the math part of it too. So I added the math major on there as well, and I was sort of gearing toward being a theoretical physics when you're a physics student in college, it's all very glamorous. You read about, Einstein and Newton, and you think about theoretical physics. Sounds really cool. You can like sit in a room and work out some equations, and then it applies to the universe. I thought that was amazing to actually mathematize the universe is just incredible. And it for the most part, it does work. There's some inconsistencies with the different models that you develop, but it's pretty amazing. So I thought I was going to be doing like gravitation theory or something like that. And so when I went to grad school, that's what I had applied for, is to try to get into a theoretical physics position. And then I changed it to experimental after a while. And so I ended up graduating with a experimental particle physics, which basically what you're trying to do is to understand what's going inside of the nucleus of an atom, and actually in particular with the inside the nucleus, there's protons and neutrons. What's going on inside of the protons and neutrons it's obviously has all kinds of applications in physics, as well as energy and things like that. So yep. And then when I was graduating, I told you the feeling I was having about wanting to apply to help people, and so I changed over to physics. So lots of medical applications. So lots of changes went on in my in terms of academically, and it's something that will probably happen to you. You think you're going to go into something like this, and you may switch your major, or all kinds of things can happen depending on who you talk to, what you read, what you learn about.
It's really cool to hear, especially just because like a lot of kids, they don't know what they want to do exactly, but they have an interest. So it's just great to hear like successful stories of people who didn't know exactly what they were doing, and then kind of just did what interested them, and how they got there.
Yeah. I mean, even going to college, I remember applying. I was on the football team, and we had a big game the night before the applications were due. I think it was UC applications or whatever it was. And I remember just last minute putting my college applications. I really wasn't very necessarily very focused. But I think that, like I said, if you just get a foundation in something that you like, that's important. That's going to carry you through school. That's what's important, is just getting something, a foundation, graduating from college and getting a strong foundation. And then when you go into the workforce, or you may go to grad school, but if you just choose not to, which is perfectly fine, most people, of course, don't. You have a just good foundation to draw from. So you may not know exactly what you're going to be doing after you graduate from college, but you have a foundation of how to learn new things. That's what college teaches you, how to learn. And so again, I think that we're all blessed if we can go to college. Most people in the world can't go to college, but we could go to college. It's just, life is hard, and I think it makes it much easier. Life is much easier if you get a college education. Just, it opens up doors more than if you don't. And so the learning to know how to learn new things, really helps prepare you for the job market or whatever you end up doing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, even if you decide to make pottery or something like that, whatever you decide, ceramics or anything, making candles or whatever like that, still the college education, I think, is a really good foundation for you to explore and learn about life. So anyway.
Yeah. And then one more question, more specific to your research. I looked at some of your publishes and stuff like that, and I just wanted to quickly ask you about one of the things that I found interesting, the cadmium
Zinc Telluride.
the PET scanner. So from what I gathered, you're experimenting with these scanners with different materials.
Yeah. So remember I mentioned earlier that in the particular type of imaging modality where we have use radioactive atoms that are attached to the dye, the contrast agent that will accumulate in the disease cells. The particles come out of the body, and then you have to detect the particles. I mean, right, when I say particle to you, it's probably just like some invisible thing. It's exactly what it is. It's an invisible form of energy, but we know they're there indirectly by how we detect them. And we detect them with materials. So the particle comes in and interacts with the materials of the detector system. A detector system might be a ring around the patient, or a tube, or a square, something where the patient's inside, and then the detectors are surrounding it. The detectors will collect those particles, the particles interact with them, and then some sort of signal will be created from their interaction in that material. And in cadmium zinc telluride, that signal that's created is an electrical signal. And then you collect the electrical signals with electronics, you read them out, and you can get little blips, little did you ever look at do you ever do a physics lab or a chemistry lab where they had what's called an oscilloscope?
No, I don't think so.
So anyway, if you do a physics lab, typically your physics teacher will know about oscilloscopes, which basically records little electrical signals. And so we can see these little electrical signals and we know the particles are there. We can measure the particles' energy. We can measure when in absolute time the particle interacts with, in this case, the cadmium zinc telluride, and we can know where it interacts as well. So because we're doing imaging, so we better know where they're coming, and we have to have a way of it's what's called solving an inverse problem based on the signals that are recorded in your detectors, in this case cadmium zinc telluride. Where did it come from? So that's a kind of a mathematical problem, and so it turns out there's properties in that cadmium zinc telluride crystal that make it better than other materials, and so we've been looking at that. So in addition to the applications in medicine biology, we also try to improve the technology for imaging in my lab.
Oh, that's awesome. And you've found some success with this material?
Yeah, we've had some success, and then so success is measured different ways. So we have published these so that other people can learn about what we did. We have made presentations at conferences so other people can know what we're doing, and then we've also tried to transfer the technology to industry so that, in principle, they could build these machines, and then it could go all around the world to help understand disease in patients, and so that we have succeeded. Could always do better, but also transferring the technology to companies. So it's kind of a weird concept, but certainly the Stanford here, and UC San Diego is the same way. In addition to publishing and presenting at conferences and things like that, one way to really disseminate your work, especially if you're working in a technical field, is by commercialization, not to make money, but to disseminate it, because I can't build hundreds of these cadmium zinc telluride scanners, but industry can. So they can sell these things around the world. So they're already now using, if you look up cadmium zinc telluride or cadmium telluride, you can see now within the last 10 years, companies like Siemens, who makes medical imaging equipment, companies like GE, who makes medical imaging equipment, they're all using this material in their imaging systems. So we feel, although we don't directly design what they use, we feel our research has helped them understand the materials enough to be able to build and disseminate these things. So that's really exciting for me, and especially exciting for students. If you're a student and you work on a project and you get your PhD or whatever, but that and you publish papers and you present at conferences, but then also that some of the ideas in that project get into a system that helps detect cancer earlier that they're using all around the world, that's real impact. And so we really care about making impact. So physics and math in our field makes a lot of impact.
Yeah, that's so cool to hear, like how sort of like a good example of like research affecting the real world, because when a lot of people like my age hear research, they just think that they're researching it, but then what happens? Like how does that affect things? But it's so cool to hear.
Yeah, and research, especially science research is at least in our countries is always there's TV shows, you see the nerdy scientists. It's really misrepresented. They're often portrays crazy people with crazy ideas and dangerous ideas, and because that's what's fun, that's what sells, and that's what people like to see in movies and TV shows, but it's just not necessarily representing what the field is. And I think while some people are working on just things just to pursue knowledge and understand, for example, basic biology or basic physics more, I find it especially interesting to see how that basic knowledge actually ends up making impact. And so I keep saying this word impact, but impact, how does it impact helping people or helping understand disease in our case? And so that's the impact, I think, is super important. When we try to start a new project, we always step back and say, hey, if this works, this is going to be really hard. It's going to take several years to develop, but if it works, will there be impact? And so that's kind of what you have to ask. And then when you're trying to get funding, you have to clarify that to the reviewers that are looking at your proposal. say, hey, we need, $5 million and here's the impact. If you don't say that, you won't get the grant usually. So
That's awesome to hear. I know I learned a lot, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us. It was great.